For lesson 53, we're talking about performing compositions of functions. Hopefully you already watched the first video where the guy explained how to go about performing these, and it's basically the fact that we're taking a function and plugging it within another function, and then all we're doing is simplifying. When we talk about composition of functions, we have a definition. The definition for composition of functions, you're going to see a lot of notation where it says f composition g of x. And when you see that, understand that's just simply f of g of x. And that's what the guy in the video was getting at right at the point, was this last part, g of f of x. And again, once you see this f composition of g, no, that is not fog, but f composition of g, it really just means the same, it is the same thing as f of g of x. With that in mind, let's go ahead and solve example number 1. They tell us to let f of x equal 3x plus 5 and g of x is equal to x squared. We want to find f composition g of x. So once again, f composition g of x means that we are looking to find f of g of x. And again, that's easy for us to remember because it just goes in sequential order like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the g of x function and simply we're going to plug it into the f function. So what I like to do is I always like to start with the function that I'm going to plug it into, the f of x function. And when I write that function, 3x plus 5, everywhere I see an x, I'm going to place a big bracket. So there's going to be my x plus 5. Now, as you already might know, we're going to plug the g of x function into everywhere where we see an x. Therefore, what do I plug in for x? Well, I plug in the g of x function, which is x squared. And at this point, all I do is simplify 3x squared plus 5. And that is my f composition g of x, or f of g of x. Still taking a look at our example number 1. Now instead of finding f composition g of x, now we're finding g composition f of x. So once again, per the definition, g of f of x is equal to, I'm going to start with my g function, which this time is x squared. So every time I see an x, big bracket, and squared. And once again, I'm going to take whatever is on the inside and I'm going to plug it into g. So what am I going to plug in here to this big bracket? Well, I'm simply going to plug in the f of x function, which is 3x plus 5. Now understand, these big brackets are really just parentheses. So what we have here is we have a binomial times itself. So yes, we do have to do the FOIL process. This is the same thing as 3x plus 5 times 3x plus 5. Hence the reason why the brackets and the parentheses are so important. So when we FOIL, we come up with 9x squared plus 15x plus 15x plus 25. Lastly, collecting like terms, 9x squared plus 30x plus 25. For example number 2, we want to evaluate the composition f composition g of 3. Notice our functions f of x is equal to x squared minus 4x and g of x is equal to 2x. This one's slightly different than example number 1 in the fact that we're no longer just having x, but now notice we have this 3 involved right here. So, for the definition, okay, f composition g of 3, that is equal to f of g of 3. We're going to begin by finding g of 3. Because just like our order of operations tell us to do, we work from the inside out. So step number 1, first step, we're going to start by finding g of 3. As always, we take our g function, everywhere we see an x we plug 3 into it, and notice our g of 3 is now going to equal 6. Let's box this answer because we're going to come back to it. Step number 2. Now we move on to the last part. Now we're going to solve for f of g of 3. Now from the first step we just found that g of 3 is equal to 6. So if we want to, by the simple substitution property, instead of f of g of 3, now we're looking at f of 6. And that's really all we're solving for. So f of 6, we go back to our f function. Everywhere we see an x, we're going to plug in a 6. So 6 squared minus 4 times 6. 6 squared is going to get us 36 minus 24. And our final answer when we're all said and done is 12. Thus, f of g of 3 is going to equal 12. Two-step process. You have to start at the beginning by working from the inside out. First by finding f of g of 3, to get 6, and then we plug this 6 value into that g of 3 and simply found f of 6 then. Last example that I have for you guys before I have you try these on your own is example number 4. Notice here we have three functions f, g, and h. They want us to find the composition function f, g, h of x. Okay, looks like a lot, right? 3 different functions that we're going to plug in. But once again, we're going to start by working our way from the inside out. If we notice on the very inside, okay, we have this h of x. And really what we're going to do in the first step is we're going to take that h of x and we're going to plug it into the next one, which is the g of x function. So the first thing, we are going to find g of h of x, So once again, taking the h of x, plugging it into the g function. My g function is 4x, big bracket, minus 5. What goes in that big bracket? Well, it's my h function, which is x squared. Therefore, g of h of x is equal to 4x squared minus 5. Now that we have found g of h of x, we are now going to plug it into the f function. So the last step. Once again, it was f of g of h of x. So now that we have our g of h of x, we're going to plug this entire thing in for f. Therefore, I'm going to start with my f function, which is negative 2x. Once again, wherever I see an x, I put a big bracket. And what goes in that big bracket? Well, it's our g of h of x, which we found right here. 4x squared minus 5. So 4x squared minus 5. There it is. And once again, I simplify. Negative 8x squared plus 10. And that is my final answer. So to review the steps, once more, first step, we took our h of x function and we plugged it into the g to get our 4x squared minus 5. We then took our nilly g of h of x and we plugged it into our f function. I know this seems like a lot. Hopefully you're seeing the process. If you're not, get with a partner when you work on these practice problems and see if you can come up with those answers. The practice problems I'd like you to work on are A, C, and F from lesson 53. Try those on your own. Again, if you need help with a partner, go ahead and get with that, and then your sub can share those answers with you once you come up with your own. Okay? We will go over this more in depth on Friday when you come back, but this will give you a good start to the lesson.